everybody. Happy game day and welcome into another edition of Before the Sandstorm. My name is Kendall Smith and I am joined by Wes Mitchell today to preview South Carolina's matchup against the Clemson Tigers tonight, set for 7:30 p.m. at Williams-Brice Stadium. And if you can't make the game in person, you can watch it on the SEC network. But Wes, goodness gracious, this game is going to be absolutely crazy. We were talking about it before we clicked the record button. The game at Williams-Brice is sold out tonight. And compared to other years in the past, you've been covering South Carolina for a while. What do you think makes this game different in terms of the fact that South Carolina actually might have an opportunity to win for the first time in a while?
Yeah, I think, Kendall, the Gamecock fans are feeling some hope right now. I mean, let's be honest, on paper, the last really 4 or 5 years, you would look at this game and you would say South Carolina doesn't really have a great shot to win. Like if they played 10 times, Clemson's winning at least 9 of those games. And now you go into this game. Obviously, there wasn't a game last year due to COVID, but South Carolina fans are sitting there saying the gap may be tightening a little bit. Tonight, we're going to find out just how much that gap has tightened, but Clemson looks beatable. South Carolina, you would say the last few weeks looks improved from where they were to start the season. It is a home game. It is a night game. I think the Gamecock fans are sort of they've just been waiting for this moment. And it's really going to be, I think, one of the best atmospheres that we have seen in years at Williams-Brice Stadium, especially if South Carolina can come out and play well early and keep this crowd in the game.
The storyline of tonight's game has been both of the defenses. Obviously, Clemson's defense, very, very good. They held Georgia's offense to just 3 points in the opening week of college football this season. South Carolina, though, with a pretty good defense as well. Jalen Foster, a really talented player for South Carolina, leads the nation in interceptions right now. So kind of compare these two defenses for me, Wes, and talk a little bit more in depth about them.
Yeah, as much as Clemson has sort of been written off a little bit this year as a team, and we like to talk about how they're not as good as they have been, Clemson's defense is still really, really good. Brent Venables does as good a job as anybody in the country, their defensive coordinator. And, it's kind of similar to their defense the last few years. They're going to create a lot of negative plays, tackles for loss, sacks. They're really built around a defensive line that is outstanding. They recruit as well as anybody in the country on the defensive line. So, from a South Carolina perspective, we know Carolina at times this year has struggled up front, has struggled on the offensive line. I was talking to a former player last night. He said, look, Carolina's O-line has got to play their best game of the year. And I think I agree with that. Like, this is not a team that you can let live in your backfield. And if you don't communicate well, if Jason Brown doesn't get South Carolina in the right looks and Eric Douglas doesn't make the right checks up front, then it could be a long night for South Carolina's offense. I think you look at the other side, South Carolina's defense, not quite on par with what you would say Clemson's defense is, but against a Clemson offense that has struggled for much of the year. Carolina defense that I believe has been opportunistic is the word I would use. They create turnovers. They've played much better at home, Kendall. And I look at this game and I say, if they can just keep Clemson from running all over them. Like we know Carolina's defense has had some struggles stopping the run, but there's a difference, in my opinion, between the other team just having some success and just dominating you in the running game. Because I think ultimately, if Clemson doesn't dominate in the running game, if South Carolina doesn't dominate in their own running game on offense, ultimately this game could shift to the quarterbacks.
So as you talked about it a little bit there with the offensive line, but what does South Carolina's offense specifically need to do to have success against this really talented Clemson defense?
I think it's a great question. I've said all week long that even punting, it sounds crazy, it's an old school thought. Even punting is not always a bad thing. If it's after you've made a couple of first downs, you've stayed on the field a little bit, the clock has kept moving. Think about the games South Carolina has just gotten blown out in. Think about Texas A&M. Think about Tennessee. In those games, they're going 3 and out, lots of negative plays, lots of sacks. If you go 3 and out with a tackle for loss and then a sack, and then you punt the ball back to Clemson and they have the ball at around the 50, this Carolina defense, as solid as they've been, is not good enough to consistently stop Clemson in those scenarios. against Auburn last week, even when Carolina didn't score, they scored 21 points. That's not some offensive onslaught. But basically, they were making some first downs. They were staying on the field. Kai Kroger was able to pin Auburn deep. To me, if you're South Carolina, you want this to be an old school, low scoring, field position football game. So don't go 3 and out. Make some first downs. And the key to that, it goes back offensive line, communication. Clemson will get after you up front if you let them get into these 3rd and longs and they know that you're passing. The key is to stay in like 3rd and 3, 3rd and 2, stuff like that. You're still not always going to make the first downs. South Carolina was like 1 for 9 on 3rd downs last week. That probably doesn't cut it this week. But at least being in those makeable 3rd downs will take some pressure off of Jason Brown, take some pressure off Marcus Satterfield as a play caller. Most importantly, take some pressure off that offensive front.
Let's talk about Clemson's offense now. A couple of players for their offense banged up. Will Shipley, a running back who did really well last week against Wake Forest, him and Kobe Pace. Kobe, I think, is doing well right now, but Will a little bit banged up. DJ Uiagalelei, the quarterback for Clemson, also banged up right now. So talk to us about what you know about that.
Yeah, they're both a little bit banged up. DJU has a knee. Shipley has an ankle. And, I think by all indications, they're playing. It's not like they're going to be out. But it'll be interesting to see. Kind of pay attention. Do they have their explosiveness? Does it affect the Clemson QB run game? Does it affect the mechanics? I look at Clemson's quarterback situation a little bit like Auburn last week with TJ Finley. Both big guys, both guys at South Carolina will have to be very conscientious about making sure to try to get them to the ground. They're not like a lot of quarterbacks where these, if JJ Enagbare hits most quarterbacks, they're going to just go down. That won't be the case this week. So South Carolina have to be physical, but I thought TJ Finley is one of those guys, and it's similar to this week. Big arm, big kid. He'll make a few throws per game where you're just like, that's an NFL throw. But we talked about it going into the game last week. Not the most efficient quarterback, not the most accurate quarterback. Kind of been the same with Clemson. So if Carolina's defense can give up some rush yardage like in between the 20s, but just find ways to get off the field with a little bit of help from the quarterback position, which is, I think, kind of what happened last week. To me, that's the key to Carolina being able to keep Clemson in that manageable. I like to say it's a manageable point total. South Carolina's not going to score 35 points on offense today. This has to be a 21-17, a 24-21. It has to be in that area, in my opinion, for South Carolina to win the game. And to me, one of the biggest differences in Clemson's offense this year compared to the last 4 or 5 years has been quarterback play. They've been so good, Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, for so long at just making the easy throws, consistency, efficiency. That has not been the case this year.
Wes, we got to talk about that hostile environment that is going to be tonight at Williams-Brice Stadium. Shane Beamer talked about it earlier in the week. He said, hey, this Clemson team, they haven't really played in an environment like South Carolina is going to have tonight. They played at NC State earlier in the season, but I would like to think that the SEC brings a little bit more when it comes to fans. Obviously, last year, because of COVID, no fans really in the stands, so no hostile environments there. You've got younger players for Clemson like Will Shipley, like Kobe Pace, like DJ Uiagalelei, who wasn't the starter last year, who are now coming into this South Carolina environment that is definitely going to be crazy. So do you think that plays a role in tonight's game in giving South Carolina maybe that 12th man advantage?
I think it could. Now, I think a little bit of what Shane Beamer has said, he pointed that out in your video on the Tiger Burn, which I watched. Very good job. I think that was a little bit of a challenge from Beamer to the fans, saying bring a little bit of extra noise tonight. Don't just cheer like it's a normal game. Cheer like you really want to tick off your cousin at Thanksgiving who's a Clemson fan. So I think that was Beamer challenging the fans a little bit. The key there, like we talked about earlier, is for Carolina, Kendall, to have some success early on, keep this crowd in the game. They went down 14-0 last week against Auburn, and credit to South Carolina, the team did not panic. But if Clemson goes up early, you're going to sort of just feel everybody knows that feeling when you sort of look around and the life kind of gets sucked out of the place. But if it's the other side, if Carolina has anything big happen early on, an early score, an early interception, a long kickoff return, something, this fan base has been waiting to cheer for something good against Clemson for a long time. So then I think if the crowd stays in it, that's when it becomes a factor. And I think you're right in pointing out the young players. There are still some guys on this Clemson team that have played in the college football playoff. So there's nothing they're going to see tonight that really will compare to the pressure of playing in the playoff. But there are some young guys. There are some newer guys. As Clemson is transitioning from those teams that made it to the playoffs to their next sort of staple of main players that have not experienced that and have, frankly, gone through an ACC schedule this year that's really not all that impressive. So to me, the longer this crowd stays in the game, the more of an actual impact they can make. If Clemson scores early, fans maybe get taken out. But if Carolina can have something good happen early on, maybe it does become a factor.
Talk about good things happening early on, Wes. Who are those key players for South Carolina today that absolutely need to play well for South Carolina to bring home the win tonight?
You know, I'm going Jason Brown. I said JB last week too. It didn't really play out like that. He had to make a few really tight throws. Great throw to Josh Vann in the end zone. For the most part, last week was about the O-line, the running backs, and the defense. But I'm going to double down on Jason Brown because I think that he's got to play his best game of the year. That doesn't necessarily mean big stats. I think that means getting Carolina in the right plays, avoiding negative plays, communication, making sure that you don't make the negative play that costs South Carolina the game because Clemson's going to come after you, going to give you a lot of different looks. It's going to be the most complicated defense South Carolina faces. So making the correct decisions, throwing the ball away if you have to. A lot will be on Jason Brown today. Again, that doesn't mean he's got to throw for 350 yards. I'm not saying that. But if at the end of this game, Jason Brown is 17 for 25 for 200 yards, a couple of touchdowns, and no picks, then I think Carolina maybe walks away the winner. Like I said, the fan base is they're just itching to be able to celebrate something. I'm sure you've seen it on campus as well, that the students are I mean, you're a junior, right? You haven't even sniffed a Carolina win over Clemson on football.
I have not. I have not. Yeah, freshman.
Think about your fifth year seniors out there, Kendall.
I know. They are absolutely chomping at the bit for a South Carolina win today, and I've seen it with the students. I mean, being out on campus and hearing what they're saying, they are so ready, and I think a lot of people are really, really confident about tonight. So we'll see how that translates on to the field this evening. But Wes, that's going to do it for today's edition of Before the Sandstorm. If you want score predictions, you can head over to GamecockCentral.com. Check out the game day guide. It's Clemson Day, baby. I don't even know what else to say. Like, it's going to be a crazy game tonight. And to all the fans coming out to Williams-Brice Stadium, be safe. Gamecock Walk is at 5:20 tonight. So if you want to check that out, Gamecock Walk, 5:20. Say hi to Wes in the stands. If you see him, I'll be covering it with Colin Taylor and Michael Saul. So stay up to date on GamecockCentral.com and on all of our social medias. But until next time, for the Bull edition of Before the Sandstorm, I'm Kendall Smith. He's Wes Mitchell, and we'll see you soon.